Let's talk about Roman helmets. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now this is going to be a comparatively short and simple video really, briefly looking at this Roman culus or helmet of the imperial period. So we're talking about really 1st century AD into the 2nd century, I guess. And this would have often been worn either with a lorica hamata, mail shirt, or a lorica segmentata, which is plate armour, essentially a cuirass of plates. And this isn't by any means an exhaustive video. Maybe at some point I'll do a video on the development of Roman helmets more. But really this is a sacrificial Roman helmet, not a particularly good quality one, it has to be said. But huge thanks have to go to Raffaello at Metatron channel because he has donated this to me. He actually sent it over to me about a year ago. I think it's been sitting in a box pretty much since then. But the reason he donated this is if you think back all that time, we're talking about during lockdown or even just before COVID hit really, I was doing things with Peelum, and I was throwing them into shields, and I was showing really about how effective these are at penetration. Now, before you go and post, Peelum are meant to bend, and you start writing all things about Peeler, please go and look at my previous videos. I've done a whole bunch of them, and I've got them in a playlist as well. So if you go and look at the videos I did previously talking about the Roman Peelum, and we found out some interesting things. We found out that they don't bend very easily at all, but they are fantastic at penetrating shields. And by and large, the conclusion that we came to, certainly that I came to, and incidentally that's shared by numerous other people, including Raffaello at Metatron, and including Mike Loads. I'm sure lots of you know Mike Loads, hopefully all of you do. And what we found was, one of the key factors to the Peelum is it penetrates the shield and hits the person behind. And it's no coincidence that the shaft of the head, should we say, or the iron shaft of the Peelum is the length that it is, because it's about the same length that's required to go through a shield and hit the person behind. So whilst anecdotally, yes, it is mentioned in the sources that sometimes these bent when people were trying to extract them from shields, what we found in the experimentation was that the primary purpose for having this long shank is to penetrate through the shield. And bear in mind, not all shields are as substantial as a Roman scutum. A lot of the shields of people that the Romans were fighting against would have been made of other materials like hide or wicker or whatever. So the principal purpose and the main reason for the design is for the javelin to pass through the shield and hopefully wound the person behind. And we find this theory of design repeated again in other cultures, in other points of history, in other places, and the Angon of the Dark Ages, early medieval period, is almost certainly the descendant of the Roman Peelum and has the same purpose. So whilst the shank can bend, particularly when you're trying to get it out of the shield rather than when it's going in, when it goes in it tends not to bend at all. That is a kind of byproduct, and that is the sort of thing that a historian at the time might mention because it was unusual, okay? But the usual thing is it penetrates the shield and hits the person behind. So how does this relate to Roman shields? Well, I thought before I destroy this shield in various ways, I would look with you a little bit at its design, and then we'll also talk about it opposed to other weapons, including things like the gladius, the Peelum, and then foreign weapons as well. Can you think what I'm maybe talking about here? So, a few features of this helmet. Now I have looked at in fact, funnily enough, I had one of Raf's helmets before, so I have actually looked at these previously. But for those of you who haven't seen my previous video, I thought to do an update before I do destructive things on this, which I'm going to do comparatively soon now. So characteristic features of the Roman culus or helmet of this particular period. So first of all, we've got a helmet bowl. Yeah, pretty much like all helmets. Interestingly, we have prominent cheek pieces. Now, those cheek pieces, most people would think, well, they're to protect from, you know, cuts or thrusts to the face. Absolutely yes. But as I always try to emphasize on this channel, we have to view these things as part of a weapon system. And when you are holding the Roman scutum or shield, There's only a certain amount of your face visible above the shield when you're in a fighting position, and conveniently this design of shield basically fills all of that. Obviously you've got the top of the head protected, but it fills what's visible above the line of the shield as well here. But importantly, one of the drawbacks of having such a large shield is it can be carried into your own face, and I genuinely believe that one of the reasons of this cheek piece is actually to protect you from your own shield. Yes, I'm not saying it's not also to protect you from enemies' weapons, but you'll notice that one of the problems with having this type of large shield that covers half of the face or comes up this high is that it can very easily smash you in the face. And so having these cheek pieces here is really very useful, and anything sliding up the shield here will encounter the cheek pieces. Now, I came to this realization when I was training people for a BBC production, which in the end never got made, but I was training people for about 3 months, and we were using Roman scutum on a daily basis and training them, and the shields did carry into their faces sometimes. Now, we were using fencing masks, so no harm came to them, but it was interesting in a fighting context how often this particular type of shield actually can bash you in the face, particularly because if we look at the handle is horizontal, which means that the shield pivots around this direction. Okay, unlike lots of other shields where you either they're strapped to your arm like that, or you hold a handle that's in vertical alignment. And if we look at certain other shields from the period, certain Celtic shields and stuff, then they'll have a vertical grip, but this has a horizontal grip. So I think that while cheek pieces are found on other helmets, Anglo-Saxon helmets and things like this, Viking era helmets, I do think that these cheek pieces are partially connected to the type of shield that was being used. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is this big flap at the back. Now, that's really unusual. Okay, we find some kind of parallel with a medieval sallet, however you want to say it. But this, if you look at the sheer size of that back on that on this Roman helmet, is really, really big and prominent. Why? Because you kind of think, well, if you're all standing in essentially a shield wall, in a shield formation or testudo, then how is the back of the head so vulnerable? Well, interestingly, what we found again, if I just keep the shield actually and switch to a sword, what we found again is when you're fighting with this weapon system, you're so well covered, and especially if the top of the head obviously has got a helmet on it, that often one of the only places that you can get around to get into the person that you're fighting against is over the back of the helmet, which means that naturally, so if your opponent has got one of these massive shields, the only places, or the kind of natural and obvious place that you're going to be inclined to attack is over the top of here, over the back of the head. And we actually found this in training, that we were often scoring hits over here. Now, if you've got this type of flaring sort of neck piece, brim at the back, then that blocks that line, and you'll notice how it flares out sideways as well. So it's not just protecting the nape of the neck, it's actually protecting the whole tops of the shoulders. And we found this also with gladiatorial helmets as well, that you have this very flaring brim at the back. So, and they use, of course, shields that are akin to the legionaries' scutum. They might use smaller versions in general, but nevertheless, it's the same kind of idea. So I feel pretty confident that that's why that's there. So we're starting to add elements together where they all connect to the fact that this is part of a weapon system where you're using this particular type of massive shield and you're using the weapons that you're using. There are a couple of other peculiar features about the Roman helmet as well. One is this brim at the front. Now that's really, really nice because you'll notice how it's up here and it's quite high, and you think, well, what does that do? Well, quite simply, if projectiles or weapons are coming downwards here, they protect the thing from, whether it's a cut or a thrust, from sliding down into the person's face. Okay, So a pretty obvious use, but the fact that it's so high up means it doesn't interfere with your vision at all. So rather than having, I'm sure you're all familiar with wearing like a peaked cap, and you get a kind of blind spot up here. But if you raise the peak up to here, it still protects weapons from sliding down, but you can now see upwards without having to lift your face up and hence expose your face to projectiles or weapons or whatever. So the final thing is the ears. Okay, so much like the brim here for the nose and maybe the eyes, things coming down at the side here could get the ears. Now, if we look at later medieval helmets, for example, usually, pretty much all medieval helmets actually come over the top of the ears, so your ears are inside the helmet. The disadvantage of that is you have a big lack of hearing. Now, we know that in the Roman military it was very important to be able to hear the signals, the trumpets, the drums, the verbal commands coming from your very organized structure of command, your command and control structure. And so they have really accentuated the importance of the ears. And I think that's really, really interesting because that tells us a lot about how the Roman military functioned and how it was different to a lot of other militaries. Because in the later medieval period, maybe they went more with visual kind of cues and commands. Maybe they fought in different ways, but it does seem from the nature of medieval helmets that hearing simply wasn't as important in the medieval period as it had been in the Roman era. So Roman era soldiers obviously considered hearing extremely important, and that tells us interesting things about how the Romans functioned. Now, in terms of testing this helmet, again, I want to thank Raffaello and Metatron. He literally donated this to the channel. We also support each other on Patreon as well, as a sort of symbolic fact that we support each other's channels, and we've collaborated quite a bit, and we will collaborate in the future, I'm certain. So this is a modern Indian-made reenactment helmet made of modern steel, and it's not made in exactly the same way as the original, so all of those things. So whenever we're testing armour, it's purely indicative, and honestly, I mean, I've thrown the Peelum against a sheet of steel before to simulate lorica segmentata, just purely as an indicative thing. And the problem is, whenever we're weapon testing against armour or shields or anything else, we always will find that you get very different results based on tiny little details. Okay, so I am going to test this. I am going to test this principally or initially against the Peelum, but I have to say that, bear in mind, by and large, I expect most things to glance off this. Okay, it's a large domed surface, so really that's only a precursor, and it's an indicative thing of what might happen to a modern kind of medium quality analogue for a Roman helmet against a medium quality analogue for a Roman Peelum. These are from Fabrica Cacti, incidentally, but they are mild steel shanks and mild steel heads. And in my previous testing, I have had to repeatedly resharpen these heads because they are only mild steel, they're not hardened steel. I believe that the originals probably would have been a slightly higher carbon steel, and they would have quenched the tip at the very least, I would think, because why not? If you've already got your forge there, because you're forging them, so you're heating them up to red heat, to quenching temperature. Just carburizing the tip is relatively easy to do, and just quenching the tip is very easy to do. So I think they would have hardened up the tip slightly and not be as soft as these. But again, this is just indicative, and it's a bit of fun. But then the weapon which might stand a larger chance of doing some interesting destructive damage to this, and yes, I am going to destroy this helmet, okay? I promise you, one way or another, I'm going to destroy this helmet. And the weapon which lots of people want to know, what does it do to a Roman helmet, is the Dacian Falx, okay? And this Dacian Falx was donated to the channel, link below, to the company that make these. and we're going to see what does a Dacian falx actually do to a Roman helmet. We know that historically the falx meant that they actually had to modify these helmets and add cross pieces and stuff to them, so we expect it will do something, but let's see. Anyway, I hope this has been interesting to watch, and watch out for the weapon testing, which will be coming hopefully really soon now when it's not raining and when it's sunny enough outside. But I'm very much looking forward to destroying this helmet. And thanks again to Raf for sending this to me. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.